Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. So now we're moving on to the next type of indirect inference. So before you go ahead, a quick recap. We have what? Inference, direct and indirect. Indirect we have conversion, obversion, contradictory, subaltern, contrary, subcontrary. And then indirect we have categorical syllogism, which is called what? Qiyas iqtirani. What's it called? Qiyas iqtirani. And then in that, it's called deduction. Sorry, you have deduction first. And then in deduction, you have qiyas iqtirani. And deduction is called what? Indirect is called what? Istidlal mubashir. And in categorical syllogism, we have what? We have the major term, major premise, minor premise, the conclusion, and the middle term. Yes? And now we've reached here, hypothetical syllogism. That is what we'll be discussing today, inshallah. And then we have two other ones to do later on, inshallah. So quick recap, in syllogisms, we have 8 rules, 2 each. The first 2 rules are to do with what? Number. So you can't have 4 terms, or you can't have what? 4 propositions. The next 2 is to do with what? Distribution. The middle term must be at least once. And
what is distributed in the conclusion must be distributed in the premise.
Correct. Whatever is distributed in the conclusion must also be distributed in the premise. The next 2 is to do with what? No 2 negatives and no 2 particulars. And then the second one is you go bottom right, the lowest of negative. And so if you have one premise negative, the conclusion must also be negative. And if you have one particular, the conclusion must also be good. Now we have a hypothetical syllogism. What does this mean? If it rains, the ground will be wet. Correct? So this is a hypothetical proposition. What does this mean? When you have 2 statements, and one of those statements is what? So this is called a hypothetical proposition. You have 2 sentences, and one of them is a conditional condition. This is called the first one is called the antecedent. What's it called? The antecedent. What comes first, basically? Even in pronouns have antecedent, don't we? In pronouns, meaning what comes first. And in Arabic, we call that the muqaddam, that which is brought forth. And the second one is called the consequent. That's called what? Ta'alin. So when you have 2 propositions, basically, if you know Nahu and Arabic grammar, shart and jawabu shart. So a shart and jawabu shart is called what? A hypothetical syllogism. No, sorry, a hypothetical proposition. Yes. So what is this? This is not a syllogism. This is what? A proposition. This is called what? A hypothetical proposition. Qadiyya shartiyya. And then when you put multiple propositions together, then you get a hypothetical syllogism. Yes. So what are the 2 terms here we have? The muqaddam and the ta'ali. Muqaddam is called the antecedent and the consequent is called the ta'alin. And a hypothetical proposition is called what? Qadiyya shartiyya. Following? Any questions? Yes? Good? So far so good? Okay. Now, in here we have a few different types of hypothetical syllogism. And so, this is a hypothetical proposition. When you put these propositions in with something else, it becomes a syllogism. So the first type of syllogism is called a mixed hypothetical syllogism. What does this mean? You have one hypothetical and the rest are normal propositions. It's mixed, meaning normal and what? Hypothetical. So it's mixed together. So if it rains, the ground will be wet. What is that? Hypothetical proposition. If it rains, what's that called? If it rains, that's called what? Muqaddam and antecedent. This is called what? The tali and the consequent. Yes? So muqaddam and the tali, the antecedent and the consequent. It rained. Now this is now a proposition. So one proposition. It is a proposition. This is also called what? A proposition. And this is also called a proposition. 3 propositions. But because one of them is what? Hypothetical, and the rest are normal propositions, it's mixed hypothetical. Do you understand what's called mixed hypothetical? So it's 3 propositions, as always. A syllogism has how many? 3 propositions. So that rule will apply here. But they're not all normal propositions. One is a hypothetical, and the rest are normal propositions. It's called a mixed hypothetical. So if it rains, the ground will be wet. It rains, therefore the ground is wet. So hypothetical proposition and simple propositions. So you call that a mixed hypothetical. So far so good? Okay. Now what are the forms? What do you call a form? A shakl, isn't it? So what are the forms? So what do we have here? We have the antecedent, which is called what in Arabic? Muqaddam. And then we have the tali. So when we look at the proposition, we have the first syllogism, the first proposition, sorry. Now, the second proposition can do one of four things. Affirm the antecedent, deny the antecedent, confirm the consequent, or deny the consequent. Give me an example here. If it rains, the ground will be wet. What is that? No, what is that? First of all, that first sentence, what's this called? This is called what? A hypothetical proposition. And it becomes the muqaddam. This is called, and this is the tali, and this is the first proposition, yes? Okay. Now, the second proposition, what does it do? It what? It confirms and affirms the antecedent. So this is a valid form. The conclusion, if the first proposition is correct, and the second is also correct, then and you affirm the antecedent, your result will be correct. So if it is true, yes, that if it rains, the ground is wet. Do you agree with that? Don't get clever and say, okay, if it's underneath the car, I won't get wet, or underneath the chair. So you know what I mean, when the ground is uncovered, etc. An uncovered ground will become wet. Yes? Is that a true statement? Yeah. What's your theory? Okay, we're assuming it's correct, okay? Now we affirm the antecedent. What do you affirm? The antecedent. Wait, what did we say? It rained. So therefore, we can conclude 100% fact that what? The ground is wet. So in a mixed hypothetical syllogism, affirming the antecedent is a valid form of deduction. Does that make sense? If we deny the antecedent, if it rains, the ground will be wet. It did not rain, therefore the ground is not wet. Is that valid? No. Why not? Yeah, you wash the car there, but you pour water there. Do you understand? So denying the antecedent is not a valid form. It may be correct, but that's just coincidental. Are you following me? So it doesn't matter. Remember, we're not looking at whether this particular example is right. We're looking at the form. This form of argument is not correct. It does not necessarily bear true results. It may bear results true, but that's just coincidental. Are you following? So this is correct. This is incorrect. Denying the antecedent does not necessarily mean that the result will be correct. What if we affirm the consequent? If it rains, the ground will be wet. The ground is wet, therefore it rained. It's also not valid. Because why? Somebody threw water on the floor. Somebody washed the car there. There's a pipe burst. Do you understand? It making sense? So even this is not a valid way of deduction. If you deny the consequent, does it make sense? If it rains, the ground will be wet. The ground is not wet. Therefore, it did not rain. It's valid. Why? Because if it had rained, the ground and got wet for sure, wouldn't it? And it's not wet, so that means that neither did it rain, nor was there any other causes of the rain falling. You following me? Make sense? So in summary, what do we have? When we have a mixed hypothetical syllogism, there are four ways we can have a form. Now the second statement, it either affirms the antecedent, denies the antecedent, as in here, as in these. So if you look over here. So in these two, the second proposition, what is it doing? It's either affirming or denying the antecedent. And in these two, we're either affirming or denying the consequent. Affirming the antecedent or denying the consequent will give us true factual information and results as long as the premises are true. Denying the antecedent or denying the consequent or affirming the consequent does not necessarily yield correct results. Fahimd? You understood? Okay. Let's do some practice here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if he loves Allah, in kuntum tuhibbun Allah fattabi'uni yuhibbukum Allah wa yaghfir lakum dhunubakum. He says, if you love Allah, then what? obey me. So if we say this, if someone loves Allah and His Rasul, he will obey the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what is this? This is a hypothetical syllogism. This is a hypothetical syllogism. What's it made up of? Hypothetical, not syllogism. This is a hypothetical proposition. This is what? Antecedent, also called the muqaddam and the antecedent. And this is called the tali and the consequent. Now, how many forms of argument can we have here? 4. We can affirm the antecedent or deny the antecedent. Affirm the consequence or deny the consequence. So that's like number 1. What's number A? He obeys the Messenger of Allah. That's what. Let's just forget all this. Let's just do one for now. What's the first possibility?
So
if he loves Allah, then for sure what will he find in his life? He obeys the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What if he says, if he does not love Allah, then no. What's the thing? If we deny the antecedent, he does not love Allah.
So we can't yield anything.
We can. So if we make the second proposition what? If he loves Allah, he will obey the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He does not love Allah, so therefore he does not obey the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's not necessarily true. Why? You may not love Allah and be a hypocrite, like the munafiqun. Many of them obeyed Allah's Messenger because what? They just thought it was the best thing to do. But they never really loved Allah and Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You're going to have a hypocrite, proper 100% hypocrite. So that's not necessarily true. If you do not love Allah, you will not obey the Messenger of sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
What does obey mean then?
Yeah, that's not the issue. Obey. You're talking about obey in all circumstances. That's like good thing. How much obedience in all circumstances? But if that's another way you can look at it. That's a deeper discussion. But for now, let's just look at it on the surface area. And the second possibility is what we have here in these two. These two are to do with what? What are these two to do with? The consequence. Now A is doing what? What's A doing? A is affirming the consequence. So if he obeys the messenger, can we guarantee that he loves Allah and the messenger? No, he may be munafiq, a hypocrite. But if he does not obey the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know for sure what? He doesn't love Allah. He doesn't love Allah. Yes? Are you following the arguments? Make sense? Have a question? No. Okay. If a teacher says to you, pay attention. So I am paying attention. You're not even taking notes. So what's he saying? What's the argument there? The indirect, the assumed. That if you are paying attention, if you take notes, she's paying attention. So if you affirm if this is true, if somebody takes notes, then they are paying attention. If you assume that it's true, that they're taking notes right now what you're saying, we know for sure they're paying attention, yes? So if you affirm the antecedent, what does that mean? What does that mean? She's taking notes, therefore. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes. And if you deny the antecedent, she's not taking notes, therefore she's not paying attention. Is that true? Not true. You might still pay attention without paying notes. You might be still paying attention without taking notes.
No, but the indirect inference is if you're paying attention.
No, you're changing the structure of the whole muqaddam entirely now.
No,
Now let's stop here. So, no, see, what you're saying now is, if she is paying attention, if she's paying attention, she's taking notes.
Yeah.
And if you want to restructure this, you can restructure this as an A proposition. What can you say? All times of paying attention is times of taking notes. Or you can also have the tasawi. All taking note scenarios or all attention scenarios. But they'll say, well, we don't agree with you. They don't agree with the premise.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? They'll say, well, this premise, we don't agree with the premise. Are you following me? They might agree with this premise. Yes, if you're taking notes, you'll be paying attention. But we don't agree that if you're paying attention, you're taking notes automatically. Some people don't take notes. Whether you should or not, it's another issue altogether. Don't bring that argument in class. But you get the point. You following? So if you affirm the antecedent, she is taking notes. So what, if you affirm the antecedent, what can you conclude from there? She is paying attention. If you deny the antecedent, she's not taking notes, therefore she's not paying attention. The teacher's making a fallacy. Yes? So you can tell the teacher you're making a fallacy of what? Fallacy of affirming or denying the antecedent. It's not valid. Or you can, if you wanted to, you could change this into what? An A proposition. That all times of taking notes is times of paying attention. And you can't convert an A. You can't say, you get it? So basically, a
If statement is an A statement.
a hypothetical syllogism is really an A statement. And you can't convert an A. That's why you can't convert this. That's why denying the antecedent is not valid. Because of that conversion. You get it? Because basically, all times of taking notes is times of paying attention, but all times of paying attention is not times of taking notes. Because you can't convert an A. Yes? Okay. And what if you affirm the consequent? No, it's still form. She's paying attention, therefore she must be taking notes.
No.
Not valid. But if you deny the antecedent, it's valid. No, you deny the consequent. She's not paying attention, so she can't be taking notes. Yes. If he goes to the pub, then he drinks. So, for example, you go to if you go somewhere, you see somebody in your club in the pub. Obviously, it's like, probably why is he there in the pub anyways? If somebody's in the pub, then he drinks. Do you affirm this? Is this proposition true? Or is it the other way around?
No, because it's not true at all. Because people.
You can be clean in the pub. So this proposition itself is not true, isn't it? Really? You say if he drinks, he'll go to the pub. Not if he goes to the pub, he drinks from home as well. Okay, let's leave that one up for now then. Okay, if I have COVID-19, I will have a temperature. That's not true as well, because I will have COVID without a temperature. But let's assume, if you have a COVID, you will have a temperature. You got temperature, therefore you got COVID. Is that true?
No.
Why not?
Fallacy of affirming the consequence.
That's fallacy of affirming the consequence. You affirming the consequence does not necessarily mean that's not a way of it. Because you could have a temperature because a normal flu, a normal fever. Yes? But if you have COVID, then you will, if you affirm the consequence, the antecedent, then what will happen? So if I have COVID-19,
Then it's 100%.
100% will have temperature. If that is true, but that's even questionable, not everybody. But you get an idea. Okay. If a person is a terrorist, he'll be critical of the government. What do people always do? They affirm the consequence. Say, if you're critical of the government, I'm a terrorist. You cannot be say, well, I love or if you're critical of the government, if you don't love the country, you're critical of the government. You might love the country, that's why you want it better. And that's why they have this thing in there. Those people who are critical of the government, they can make it pass a law, and then they get reverted to prevent now to make them to remove. That's why I think one of the Tory thing was saying that we're going to have that law passed. That everybody who's cynical of the government, what's it, cynical, not cynical, cynical or critical or what's the word they use? Some word they use in there. They're going to have that. So that's not true. So if somebody is critical of the government, it doesn't mean that he hates the country. Maybe he loves the country so much he wants the government to get better. That's what happens in all companies, isn't it? You want to get better. So if somebody's critical of the government, that's why it's like self-criticism is the best way of improvement. So if you're a terrorist, yes, terrorists will be critical of the government. But because you're critical of the government doesn't mean you're a terrorist. Doesn't mean you don't love the country. Doesn't mean this. This is a form of it's a fallacy. Yes? Okay. If a student works hard, they will pass the exam. And they pass the exam, that means? Affirming the consequence. Maybe they passed it very clever. They didn't revise. And if a student works hard, they pass the exam. If they didn't work hard, they didn't pass the exam? No. Because why? Denying the antecedent. Not a valid form of argument. Yes? What is a valid form of argument? If he did not pass the exam, that means he did not work hard. Yes? If this is a particular person who has ability. Or what else we can confirm? That if they did work hard, what did they do? They passed the exams. If he washed all the 4 parts of ablution, his hands, his face, and masa, everything, he would have purity for salah. He did not wash his 4 parts. What's the conclusion? He does not have wudu for salah. Is that a valid conclusion?
Yeah, because affirming that's negating. No.
Why is it wrong?
You're negating the antecedent.
You're negating the antecedent, and that's not valid. Why?
You can't negate the antecedent.
Quduri padne wale, quduri wala. Ji, why not?
You have any other?
What's that other form? Tayammum. Get it? What do? You deny the consequent. You deny the consequent. No, you deny the antecedent, sorry. You deny the antecedent. Yes? If my husband gives me flowers, then what does that mean? He loves me. He did not give me flowers. What does that mean? It's a human. What does that mean? Come on. This is exactly, yes. So if my husband gives me flowers, he loves me. He did not give me flowers. What does that mean? Does that mean he does not love me? What does that mean? There's no proof of anything in it. Because why? You're denying the... If my husband... So let's do for everything. If my husband not open a car door for me, if my husband open a car door for me, he loves me. If he does not open a car door for me, can you say he does not love me? Come on, can you say it? You can't say it. If my husband does the dishes, he loves me. If he didn't do dishes, can you say he does not love me? You can't say it. If he hoovers the house, that means he loves me. If he didn't hoover the house, that means he does not love me? No. So you can't. That's what? Illogical argument. So therefore, that argument no longer stands in this house. Yes. So you've now done all the reasoning behind of this. Yes. So it's what? That's a fallacy of negating a consequence. So that fallacy, that argument, not work anymore. Do you understand? Yes. Following. Yeah. So in summary, I didn't have the summary here, but also summary, we're doing hypothetical propositions. First, well, syllogisms. Obviously, a hypothetical syllogism is made of a hypothetical proposition. And a hypothetical proposition is made of what? Antecedent, known in Arabic as muqaddam, and the consequent, which is known as a tali. And when you put them together, when you put a hypothetical proposition in a three-part syllogism, it becomes a hypothetical syllogism. And the first form of hypothetical syllogism is what? A mixed, meaning one is a hypothetical. The first part is what? It's called a what? The first part is a hypothetical proposition, and the other two are normal. So this is called a mixed hypothetical syllogism. And you can have the first part, hypothetical proposition, followed by a result, a second sentence, and a conclusion. There are four ways of doing this. You have the first hypothetical syllogism. The second statement can either affirm the antecedent. Is that valid, invalid? Valid. Or deny the, which is invalid. Or affirm the, which is also not valid. Or you can deny the consequent, which is valid. So you have four types of deduction from a hypothetical syllogism, mixed hypothetical. Only two are valid, the other two are not valid. Fahimt? Any questions? Okay. Subhanallah, bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.